Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that everyone was able to make it here today. In light of Pride Month, we wanted to shine a light on the mental health in the LGBTQ plus communities. For many queer people, socioeconomic and cultural conditions will negatively impact and aggravate their mental health. From discrimination and stigma to navigating multiple oppressions, these communities often bear the brunt of mental illness. Today, we've assembled a spectacular panel to learn about how to navigate these mental health challenges as an LGBTQ plus individual, as well as how to support any LGBTQ plus loved ones as an ally. And just a heads up, we will be recording this today. So if you'd like to revisit any of the things that our panelists say or want to share any of this with a friend, keep an eye out for a link to this session in an email, and we'll make sure we get that out after this. Also, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A portion or the chat below, and we'll have the last 15 minutes here together to kind of ask our panelists some direct questions. Without further ado, let me introduce our awesome panelists that we've got here. First up, we've got Ben Goldman, he, him. Ben completed his master's degree in mental health counseling at Hunter College and is currently a private practice therapist in Manhattan. He has experience working with relationships and intimacy, masculinity, family dysfunction, workplace success and discipline, attachment needs, substance use, and self-compassion. Benjamin is also a member of the gay community from North Carolina and is familiar with the complexities of intersecting identities and culture. Next up, we've got Sabine Maxine Lopez, she, they. She is the founder and executive director of a tribe called Queer in Los Angeles, California. Sabine identifies as a natural-born, multi-hyphenate, non-binary femme who you can find expressing herself through design, writing, photography, fashion, and much more. Most recently, her essay, My Journey to the Design, was included in the book, The Black Experience in Design, Identity, Reflection, and Expression. Last but not least, we've got our very own Susanna Potter, she, her. She is a skilled psychotherapist with over 14 years of experience in the mental health field. She offers an embodied approach to counseling that goes beyond the traditional talk therapy by integrating unique techniques like dance and movement, yoga, and DBT into her practice. She is the founder of Body-Wise Psychotherapy, which aims to help people become more aware of the information that is constantly being communicated between their mind and their body. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Really excited to be able to kind of talk a little bit about these issues. I mean, in New York here, it's going to be a big weekend. There's a huge Pride celebration and Pride parade and all of that happening. But this entire month has been kind of a Pride focused month. And I feel like it's really important to be able to talk about these things, because traditionally and historically, there has been quite a bit of stigma that's contributed to some pretty negative mental health effects. As a starter, I would love to just kind of kick off by asking, like, what are some unique mental health challenges that the LGBTQ plus community have faced? I mean, Susanna, I don't know if I can put you on the spot first here, but I would love to see, like, do you have any kind of anecdotal experience from your work that you've done as a therapist, or just anything that you kind of noticed in your kind of personal and professional lives?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. First of all, thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here on this panel and honoring Pride Month and what it stands for, and you know, just really being present and visible as a community. Yeah, it's a big question. I think I can probably come up with quite a large list, but I think in essence, the unique challenge is just being seen and being acknowledged as a valuable, part of the world, right? In our sexual identity, and all of that it encompasses. And I think being systematically oppressed and told that we're not somehow normal or valuable or allowed to take up space, that that does naturally creates mental health challenges such as, you know, shame, low self-esteem. I mean, the list goes on. Dysphoria, especially in our bodies, being present in our beautiful queer bodies, right? Being able to encompass that and really breathe into that, I think that it becomes a challenge. So I think, yeah, that I'll pause there, but that's what I've seen and experienced myself. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think that's such an important point, is like the connection of the mind and body that you focused on. And actually, if I remember right, Ben, I think you kind of mentioned something pretty similar recently on Instagram. I mean, do you want to elaborate anything that you've noticed there?
Yeah, thank you, Susanna, for just jumping right in. I think that like something that we need to remember as well when we're talking about the psychology of queer oppression, right, is that the concept of minority stress as a research topic wasn't even started as a research topic until, I want to say, the early 90s, right? And there's a 2016 like really like critical research study in the annual review of clinical psychology that gives kind of like the social scientific and psychological integration of how queer oppression fits into minority stress. So minority stress as a concept gives us the insight around how and why people who have oppressed identities have unique, emotionally high stake experiences that might not be as high stake for people who don't have those same identities. And, you know, I'm a white gay man. We have, you know, some queer folks of color on the panel. So I think that like they can speak even better than I can to like the power of intersectionality and how that plays into this, especially when we bring into account race, gender, and sexual orientation. But I think that just like where my mind goes to is I like to kind of like get with like the deep rooted research to begin with, which is complicated because like up until, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, this wasn't even prioritized as a research topic, right? So that's something that comes to mind for me when I start to think about like, why is it that queer anxiety, queer depression, queer stress has a unique quality? And it's not just a terminal uniqueness entity. So that's some opening thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why celebrating Pride is so much more than just like throwing a big parade. It's like bringing attention to something that's been so kind of ignored outright for so long. So I think that's a really, really amazing point that you bring up there. Sabine, I want to kind of switch over to you because I have never heard anyone introduce themselves as someone who identifies as multi-hyphenate. And I love that term. And kind of like what Ben was saying with like intersectionality, like I wonder if you could kind of bring a little bit more into one, like, did you steal that term from someone else and can I steal that too? Or two, like, tell me a little bit more about what multi-hyphenate means to you and the intersectionality piece that Ben was kind of introducing there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Just for the record, I want to state I am not a therapist. I don't have that education. I'm speaking from my experience and the experience of my friends and my acquaintances and my community members that, you know, that I know and love. And Yeah, although I will say I did work for the Department of Mental Health on the administration side. So I worked there for about 8 years. So I got to see a lot of the back end stuff that a lot of people don't. And so that was interesting. And that also gave me a really good education into our systems and how they are not working. But in terms of multi-hyphenate, I read that somewhere and I was like, oh yeah, that's me. Like I have always been a person that has dabbled in many different areas of creativity. And so I have struggled with like trying to pick one thing to do. And so I don't know, I just got to a point was like, why do I have to choose? I'll just do them all. And, you know, if they make me happy, they make me happy. And yes, you can absolutely steal that term. I took it from somewhere. I don't even remember where, but yes, everyone can use that word if it applies. In terms of, you know, my intersectionality, I mean, and the question that you asked, I mean, I think about, it comes down to the very basic thing of just existing, especially existing in this country and other countries where there are laws that are being created that tell you that, quite frankly, you're not real, you don't exist, this is not a real thing, you know, especially if you identify as a trans person, more specifically a Black trans person. And so just having to live in this world and exist, it definitely creates, you know, some mental health struggles. I myself have my own struggles, and I talk with my friends about them, and it's really hard, and that's why I'm glad that we're here today to talk about these things, and hopefully come to some kind of conclusion on how we can get more resources out into our community, because they're very, very much needed.
I mean, and actually, I don't want to keep putting you on the spot here, but I don't know if you have any suggestions for people that are looking for support. Like, do you have any like go-to recommendations that you normally give to people, in whether it's the LGBTQ plus community or an ally? Do you have anything that you would be able to like point in the right direction?
In terms of resources for mental health services? Well,
Yeah.
I'm working on our resource page right now for our website at A Tribe Called Queer. And my goal for this resource page is to be one of the best in existence, because I want you to be able to go there and actually get services or get connected to services. Because I think a lot of times when people get pointed into, you know, a specific direction or to a therapist or to a website, nothing actually happens. You click, and then nothing. And so that is to come. So stay tuned for that. But it is in the work, right? It is in the works right now. But in terms of like general services right now, there are a lot of really pay what you can or sliding scale therapy services that exist, because I think the main struggle is like accessibility. You know, therapy is not cheap. It's very expensive. There are times where I've had to stop therapy because I couldn't afford to pay it. Some insurance services don't cover therapy or mental health. It depends on like what you have. And so accessibility is important. I know a lot off top that are based in LA. And so I don't want to be very specific to LA, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, I think you bring a really like scary point is a lot of insurance policies don't cover mental health. And it can be extremely inaccessible for a lot of people. I mean, Ben, I don't know if you want to jump in here as a therapist yourself. Like, do you have any recommendations for people that are kind of facing that accessibility problem of not being able to find a therapist that they can afford?
Totally. The most commonly asked questions in my DMs on social media is, I need a therapist. Can you help me find one? And I could have a whole conversation around that topic in itself. But, you know, I'm so glad to hear that Sabine is working on a database for their website and organization. I think it's super critically important. You know, for New York residents, there is a 40-page LGBTQ referral document from Callan Lord, which is the pinnacle of LGBT services in the city. Individual practitioners, group practices. Some that come to mind off the top of my head are the Institute of Human Identity. We have KIP Counseling, New York Counseling and Clinical Work Services, NYC Affirmative Psychotherapy, Metropolitan Center for Mental Health. So there are, and to Sabine's point, like it really does vary based on what your individual circumstances are, right? There was an article in the New York Times last year that was interviewing the LGBTQ director at Vassar College, who said that, given that we are still kind of in the, pandemic era, 225 students at Vassar, which, talk about intersectionality, is a very expensive school, typically has a more affluent, or students who maybe like have a certain kind of financial aid package going on there. 225 students from their 2,200-ish student population remained on campus because they did not feel safe sheltering in place at their home. So they opted to stay in isolation in a college dorm room compared to going back to their place of residence. I think this speaks to like kind of what I was saying before, the inaccessibility of access to care, as well as just how high stake and high risk in 2022 mental health issues are for LGBTQ young people. And this is college age students, and like I said, this is, higher education, like affluent institution, right? We're not even talking about low income people who are still under their parents' supervision, right? People who might be in unsafe queer environments, right? Who are even more at risk. So I think that, like, to Sabine's point, the expansion and accessibility of mental health services is so critical. Unfortunately, we have organizations like the Trevor Project, New York City Well, other counseling lines that have 24-hour access. But like this intersection between inaccessibility to care and higher stake mental health for LGBTQ issues is of the utmost importance where we are today.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it is very scary to think about that stat from Vassar alone. I think just a small little example of what the overall picture is like. I think it's probably even more dire than that in a lot of other cases. But I think that kind of makes me think about like, how does one even embrace their identity despite the social standards or what kind of conditions they might be facing, whether it's at home or in their communities, when the other side isn't willing to do the same and like embrace that part of them, like embrace that hyphenate, right? Did I say that right? Part of them. I would love to hear if any of you want to jump in and like talk about like how do you safely embrace yourself as the totality of who you are. Would anyone like to just dive in here? Sabine, do you want to jump in?
Sure. That's difficult because the issue of safety is very, very important. And that is why there is a large population of LGBTQ youth that are homeless, because they choose themselves over staying with their family. It's safer for them to be on the street essentially than to stay with their family. And so I don't know if there's one answer, but I would say that you have to just believe that you know who you are better than anybody else, and choose that and follow that and choose to live a life that is 100% authentic to who you are and who you love and who you like and all of those things. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I love that. Susanna, do you want to add anything else here?
Yeah, Sabine, you make a great point. I think that safety is relative. Safety is relative, and I think In many cases, as a queer person, the question is not so much how can I create safety, but how can I be safe enough, just safe enough, to tolerate uh, the situation. And I also want to speak to just the resilience of queer people, and in particular trans folks, being able to um, leave home at a young age and find their way. And I think I also want to speak to just the culture of finding your chosen family. That's another part of our culture, being able to find community in other queer folks that are experiencing maybe a similar experience of being oppressed and being cast out, or having to choose to leave home because it's not safe. And yeah, so community and queer spaces, and I think that's something that we have, and that we've developed over years and over time. um and so I think that as difficult as it is, we're also a very strong and resilient community. Yeah, and that's, yeah, so I just wanted to name that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Ben, I feel like you want to dive in here too. Go ahead.
Yeah, please. Let me just be very clear about something. Queer outness is not queer safety. And I think this is the big miss of pop culture, social media, 2022 conceptualization of queerness, is that queer outness and queer safety go hand in hand. It's a nice, fantastical idea, right? We talk about intersectionality, we talk about, multifaceted conceptualizations of oppression, right? And we need to understand that when you're choosing between some degree of financial stability and some degree of outness, that's not an easy choice, right? When you're choosing between integration within your Black or brown community, or integration within a homonormative white gay culture, that's not an easy choice. These decisions are because of the multifaceted intersectional identities of queer folks, create decision-making processes that are so much more nuanced and complicated than a Netflix show will ever epitomize, right? And so I think that one of the most powerful tools for queer inclusion, which is queer representation, is also accompanied by queer idealism, which sometimes can be just as alienating as being in the closet, right? Talk about people who had a emotional hangover response to Heartstopper. You're having this idea, this idealized image of queerness that you're seeing on your screens, and it feels inaccessible to you. So I think that this is where some of the dissonance lies. And I think it's so critical that we talk about this in the context of queer safety.
That is a brilliant point. I mean, I think something that comes to mind for me is just how all of a sudden June 1 rolls around and all these corporations are talking about gay pride. And it's wait, that didn't seem to be the message just a week ago. And I think it can be idealized in a lot of ways. And I'm sure we've all been seeing those memes about a corporation kind of leveraging Pride Month to kind of say oh, we've always been this way. And it's well, have you been? And have your hiring practices shown otherwise and things like that. So I mean, I think it's really good that we're able to talk about this for sure. And I don't know, I mean, I guess something else that comes to mind for me is I'm sure a lot of people have probably been following Beyonce dropped a new song the other night, and it has a very LGBT kind of focused root to it, well, whether it's like one of the people that she sampled from in it, and it's like the style of music and all of that. But like, does the LGBT community get the credit for that? Probably not in a lot of ways. And so, I mean, basically, one thing I would love to see if we could talk about is like, in terms of kind of finding that representation and that safety, like, where do you find that Venn diagram kind of coming together? And like, are there things that we could recommend to, whether it's allies or people even in the community, to kind of close that Venn diagram? I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that first.
It's a great question. I think that like I'm like super passionate about like the intersection between mental health and pop culture. That's like kind of like my thing. And like the question around how we integrate representation and like actionable like queer like safety issues or mental health concerns like ultimately comes down to like continuing to create representation that includes as many identities as we can. And it's tricky, right? It's hard to toe the line between tokenization and inclusion, right? And this is what people are constantly critiquing about, especially on like queer Twitter or social media, right? Is like, you tried to include this like, you know, non-binary brown person of color, and what we got was a kind of pathetic trope that honestly, like no one wants to see. So there's kind of like this balance between like, how do we critique art and media while also being able to say to ourselves something like, well, you know, there's maybe some 13-year-old queer person who is benefiting from even this trope, right? And this is also why I think that like media representation has to be person-centered more so than, you know, an I thou like person to the screen relationship, right? When we introduce and interject more access to safe queer people, right? We are allowing people to find individuals that they can have personal relationships with and feel safe around, right? So much of the introduction to queerness is through sex, right? You know, whether that, you know, yeah, it's, you know, whether that be through porn, whether that be through a sexual relationship, or, you know, internet sites for sexual connection. And this is why like there's so much of a stereotype around predatory sexual behavior and things like that. And it doesn't represent all of queerness whatsoever, but like continuing to create media and social platforms where queer people can connect with each other and have like an intimate, safe relationship, I think is like probably the best way that people can find empowerment and representation.
I love that. Yeah, empowerment is a huge thing too that needs to happen in the community. So thank you for bringing that up too. I mean, Susanna or Sabine, do you want to jump in with any other extra points there?
I think in terms of representation, it just becomes more and more clear that we need to have stories that are created by queer people, especially when they're people of color or Black people. You know, we need to create our own stories. We need to be able to have, you know, the upper people in suits, you know, give us access to be able to create our own stories, because they're usually the ones saying yes or no, right? That's the reality. But we need, you know, we need to tell our own stories. And also that looks many different ways. Sometimes, you know, there are assholes out there, and like we need to show, sorry, I don't know if we can cuss. We need to be able to have multifaceted characters, you know, because that's what exists. That's what's real, you know, whether it looks good or not. And I believe in that. So I don't know. I just like, I would like for it to reflect a little bit of reality sometimes, not all the time, but, you know, most of the time it's important. And, you know, there are queer kids out there that need to see these things. And You know, I think of my little baby niece who came out as trans at a very young age in middle of America. And, you know, she needs to see these stories. She needs to see someone like her, you know, living their best life. And yeah, so that's all I have to say about that.
I love that. Yeah, living the best life. Yeah, Susanna, do you want to add something there too?
Yeah, I want to say, well, we need to be the one in suits, the ones in this. Yeah. So yeah, this concept of like taking up those seats at the table, right? And I think one example that I can give in just my personal experience, I'm just sitting with this idea of representation and inclusion and tokenism, and just how you toe the line between all of that. And I think that you know, I'm a board certified dance movement therapist, and there's the American Dance Therapy Association, and then I'm leading an affinity group. So there's these affinity groups that are there to create these safe spaces, and of course we have the LGBT affinity group, the Latinx affinity group, then we have this, you know, multicultural and diversity committee, which kind of is like the umbrella, and you know, an example of not only like you were saying, Sabine, getting the people in charge, right, to give us that access to tell our stories, but actually being the people in charge, is that you know, for the first time, we had a Black woman be the president of the American Dance Therapy Association, Angela Grayson. She's incredible. And you know, just seeing that, and the seeing how, and the way in which the previous president, who was a white male, he actually stepped down early, and you know, just also just seeing that, you know, it's not just about the people who are marginalized standing out and taking up space, and the bravery and the risk that entails, but it's also the people that are in privileged positions, in parts of their identity that hold privilege, to be able to recognize that and pass the baton on. It's a collaborative process, you know. We can only get so far as the marginalized group, in taking a stand and representing ourselves, and taking. It's also about the balance of power, right? That power being that is being so tightly held on to, being loosened, right? That grip being loosened. And so yeah, so I don't know where I'm going with this, but those are my thoughts.
I love it. Yeah. And I mean, I think those are some really good points. And I think, like, why don't we see more representation, and whether it's the suits or whatever? But yeah, thank you. And so I do want to say we're open to questions and answers at this point. So if anyone wants to drop a question in the Q&A or the chat portion below, feel free to drop some. I do have one question here that I would love to kind of hear each of your perspectives on. Is someone is asking if you have any advice or recommendations on how you kind of grew into your authenticity. And please forgive me if I'm botching this question, but like, were there things that you all did that kind of helped you kind of understand who you were, and made it feel like, yes, okay, I know who I am? I don't know if someone wants to kind of dive in first here, but like, would love to hear what you guys have to say on this.
I can share about my experience. Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't come out very early. It took me a while to get there. You know, I always knew that I was attracted to everyone. I didn't have the language for it. At the time, I thought I was bisexual because that's what I knew. That's the word that I knew. And so I was like, oh, I think I'm that. But I told very few people. I never shared that part of myself with anyone until, you know, until I reached 30, and I was just ready. And I don't know what it is that made me want to just say, F it, I need to just live my life. But, we all know when we're being true. And I guess I was just tired of not being true to myself. And so I finally came out, and I didn't have like this crazy coming out story or anything like that happened. But it wasn't until I met my partner and we decided to get married when things started to get really difficult, and I had to really make a choice and say, this is my family, this is the person I'm choosing to create a family with. And it was difficult, and I didn't get to talk with my biological family for a very long time, but I made that choice. And it was just about, I can only share my experience. So for me, it came down to like, this is the love that I found, and this is the family that I want to create, and this is the life that I want to live, and nothing was going to stop that. And so I had to choose that and choose myself. And I don't know if there's any one thing that makes it easier to do that. A lot of times it's very hard, and it's a struggle, and you have to let go of people who you love. And you have to just choose yourself. And I don't know that there's an easy answer for that, but I can say that doing it is beautiful, and you're not going to lose yourself, and that should always be number one. So I don't know.
Wow, thank you, Sabine. That's really beautiful. And congrats for you and the beautiful life that you've created too. So yeah. Susanna, Ben, do you want to hop in here?
Yeah, authenticity, right? Like, I think that learning to be the most authentic version of myself is something that I'm like still learning how to do. I think that as a therapist, a rational emotive behavior therapist, which is the type of therapy that I practice specifically, it'd be unfair to like my current journey to say that like I have developed rock solid internal belief systems that allow me to feel 100% authentic 100% of the time. Now, I actually was just talking to my therapist about this. When you are on a journey for authenticity, sometimes you have this really deep desire for other people to validate the progress that you've made around your own authenticity. And I think that's where I'm at today with my journey in authenticity. I see myself as having progressed to a point of like, June 22nd, 2022's version of authenticity. And right now I'm like really looking for ways to kind of find helpful and healthy validation for where I've gotten in terms of my authenticity journey. So I think it's a fluid process. In order to be a therapist, you don't have to have like everything figured out. You don't have to be perfectly assured in your authenticity. But I think that like the journey of learning of teaching people how to do that for themselves is an extremely personal and internally reflective journey as well. I think that's where I'm at currently.
That is such an excellent thing that you bring up, is just like, it's a journey and it's a process. It's not terminal. Like, it's not like, oh, I've arrived, like that's it, I made it. Like, I think that's a really important thing to remember. And I think that's an excellent point that you bring up. Susanna, do you want to chip in anything here?
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Sabine has said, and also Ben. Yeah, it's I think coming out is ongoing. I think you don't come out once. I mean, in my experience is like I come out probably every day, every week. You know, I think it's easy for people to look at me and assume, and I think I'm I present myself in a way that might be easily read as cisgendered and a woman and possibly straight. I don't know, but I think that yeah, I think that dynamic between my sense of self and how I'm being perceived, or how I think people are being perceived, like that whole thing is always there. Um, and I also think that word fluid, I think that sexual identity is fluid, whether we're talking about gender or our orientation or our preferences when it comes to down to the acts and all of that. I think that it's fluid and we change over time. And I think that what was authentic to me maybe a few 10 years ago is maybe completely different now. So that's another thing too, like being in tune with myself along the way, and as I grow and maybe find different terminologies and different labels and that feel more authentic to me now, I might have to grieve and let go of some old ones, and so it's a process. And I think the key for me is, I would say, it comes down to being in tune with myself and bravery. Like those would be the words that I would use as a guidepost, I guess. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to name that for any queer people or questioning or curious people that might still be in the closet, that you are valid, right? Like I also just want to name that like it's a process and there are stages, and I think that if you could be out in one ways and in the closet another way, so I think that you are still valid no matter what. So just wanted to name that too.
Sabine, I can tell that you want to just dive in right here. Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
I loved everything you said. Thank you oh my gosh, thank you for saying that and validating everyone's experience, because that's also really important. And first, I have fluid tattooed here because I absolutely believe in the fluidity of everything. And to touch on that a little bit more, like I think allowing yourself the grace and like patience to know that like you are gonna change. Like as time goes on, as you educate yourself more, as you heal your traumas, you're going to change. And so allow yourself some grace and like give yourself some grace and patience, and know like, okay, it's not always going to be like this. And just like you said, like what's authentic to me now might be different, and that's okay. Like it's totally fine. And yeah, I just thank you for saying all of that.
Man, that was definitely a good mic drop moment, and I cannot believe it, but we are at time. This flew by today, and cannot thank you guys enough for being here. I think this was an extremely helpful conversation. I'm excited to kind of see more work that you guys do in this space and just in general. You guys are doing some really awesome work out there, so thank you. Just as a reminder, we are going to be uploading this discussion to YouTube and sending it out in case you would like to revisit anything or share anything. The email that the link will be in will also have some other links to our panelists, and you can learn more and follow them as well. As a reminder, help is available for mental health support through group therapy with Grouport. You can go to grouporttherapy.com to find your group, as well as other resources on how group therapy could help you. Thank you again for coming out to our group chat today. We hope that you'll be able to join us another one. We're trying to host these on a regular basis and have some more super interesting panelists like we did today. And happy Pride Month to you all. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys. Bye now.